On the damp morning of July 14th, 2021, a heavy diesel flatbed truck rumbled down a forgotten, unpaved logging road deep within the heart of the southern Appalachian biosphere. Inside its specialized, climate-controlled cargo bay rested exactly 500 sealed, aerated wooden crates, each kept at a precise temperature of 54 degrees Fahrenheit to induce a state of artificial hibernation. The vehicle groaned as it crossed a rusted iron bridge, entering a vast, silent basin that maps had designated 40 years prior as an ecological dead zone. What lay packed within those dark wooden compartments was not machinery or standard agricultural cargo, but a fragile, living cargo, destined for an experiment that many believed was already doomed to fail. What unfolded across that silent landscape over the subsequent 24 months was something absolutely nobody predicted. It was a transformation so swift and profound that it stunned the senior field researchers, upended established conservation models, and initiated a wave of debate that scientists still discuss in peer-reviewed journals today. My name is Christopher Vance, and this is the full arc of the extinct meadow. By the time this narrative concludes, you will understand three specific things. First, you will discover the hidden biological mechanism that allows a vanished ecosystem to retain a phantom memory of its own past. Second, you will see exactly how a single delicate species can act as a profound force of physical terraforming on a macro scale. And finally, you will understand the precise meteorological anomaly that occurred 2 summers later, altering the very properties of the air and light above the valley floor. But to understand the full arc of the extinct meadow, you have to start with something entirely unexpected: the silent, microscopic architecture of ancient soil chemistry. For nearly half a century, the valley was regarded by agricultural scientists as completely sterile, a victim of intensive mid-century chemical runoff and aggressive overgrazing that had stripped the topsoil of its organic vitality. When the last native flora perished in the late 1970s, the land became an ecological vacuum, a monoculture of invasive, coarse cheatgrass that supported no insect life, no birds, and no mammalian predators. In a definitive 2012 study published in the Journal of Applied Ecology, researchers noted that such degraded meadows enter an arrest state, a permanent stasis where the natural cycle of regeneration is completely broken. The consensus was absolute. Without millions of dollars in mechanical soil remediation, nothing of value could ever grow here again. But that is not what happened. The researchers supervising the project chose to bypass traditional, heavy-handed human intervention entirely. They focused instead on the concept of the keystone species, an organism that exerts strong control on the structure of a community relative to its abundance. In this instance, they selected the regal fritillary, a majestic butterfly that had not been seen in this region for generations and was locally classified as extinct. The prevailing scientific literature, including a landmark 2016 paper in Biological Conservation, insisted that introducing an apex pollinator to a landscape devoid of native flowers was an exercise in futility. The insects, critics argued, would starve within 48 hours, leaving the valley as barren as they found it. What the critics failed to account for, however, was the latent archive of seeds buried deep within the earth, waiting for a catalyst that humans could not replicate. The 500 hibernating butterflies were carefully transported to the center of the basin, where the team constructed a series of minimal, temporary netting structures to allow them to acclimate to the ambient humidity. When the sun reached its zenith, the enclosures were retracted, and 500 pairs of patterned orange and silver wings fluttered upward into the stagnant valley air. To the naked eye, it appeared to be a poetic but ultimately meaningless gesture against an overwhelming expanse of pale, choking weeds. The butterflies dispersed into the vast emptiness, and within days, the field team could no longer locate a single individual. For the remainder of that first summer, the valley returned to its familiar, dead silence, and the experiment was widely whispered to be a total failure. Yet beneath the surface of the soil, a silent chain reaction had already begun. And here is where the story turns on a piece of pure luck. In early September of that first year, an unseasonal, torrential, atmospheric river diverted from its typical coastal path and stalled directly over the mountain basin for 4 consecutive days. This was not a standard seasonal rain, but a historic deluge that saturated the hard-packed, clay-heavy earth deeper than any storm had in a century. Had this moisture arrived a year earlier, it simply would have caused massive erosion, washing away the lifeless topsoil. But the brief presence of the 500 butterflies, even in their limited lifespan, had introduced a critical element to the meadow floor. As they searched for sustenance, they had targeted the tiny, almost invisible patches of native violet leaves that had managed to sprout in the deep shade of the valley margins. In doing so, they had inadvertently cross-pollinated these isolated survivors, dropping thousands of microscopic, highly fertile seeds across the central plain. The massive rainfall acted as a profound awakening mechanism for these newly deposited seeds, as well as for ancient seed banks that had lain dormant in the deep clay for 5 decades. When the waters receded, the moisture did not evaporate immediately. Instead, it was held in place by the dense root networks of the invasive weeds, creating a humid, subterranean greenhouse effect. By the spring of the second year, the uniform blanket of dull grey cheatgrass began to fracture. Small, vibrant shoots of wild blue lupin, purple coneflower, and native milkweed began to push through the crust of the earth in numbers that defied all statistical modeling. The valley was no longer a monoculture. It was becoming a complex, highly specialized canvas of botanical diversity. This sudden ecological awakening quickly connected the valley to a much larger, global conversation regarding human survival and the preservation of our collective natural heritage. For generations, industrialized societies have treated the loss of wilderness as an inevitable tax on progress, a collateral sacrifice that could be managed through small, artificial parks and isolated nature reserves. The extinct meadow, however, became a living counter-argument to this philosophy, demonstrating that nature does not merely diminish linearly, it holds its breath, waiting for the slightest opportunity to reclaim its dominion. The project suddenly drew fierce opposition from local industrial interests who had eyed the valley for a massive open-pit aggregate quarry, arguing that a barren wasteland was better utilized for economic infrastructure than left as a useless, empty field. The developers threatened legal injunctions, claiming the project was an artificial manipulation of land values. But the biggest surprise was still to come. As the second summer reached its peak in July of 2023, the true payoff of the experiment manifested in a spectacle that defied ordinary human comprehension. The 500 original butterflies had reproduced exponentially, their offspring finding an absolute paradise of native flora that now stretched from one end of the basin to the other. The silent valley was silent no longer. It hummed with the deep, resonant vibration of millions of insect wings, a sound that could be felt in the chest of anyone standing on the ridges above. The air was thick with the rich, honeyed scent of blooming wild nectar, replacing the dusty, stagnant odor that had characterized the region for half a century. Then, on the afternoon of August 3rd, the sky itself changed color. A massive, unprecedented supercolony of millions of descendant butterflies took flight simultaneously, lifted by a warm thermal updraft that rose from the vibrant, sun-baked valley floor. As they reached an altitude of 300 feet, their densely packed, iridescent orange and silver wings caught the direct rays of the late afternoon sun. To observers standing on the surrounding peaks, the horizon did not merely shift. The entire sky turned a deep, shimmering, luminous amber, a radiant dome of living color that cast a warm, golden glow over the entire landscape. The ambient light of the valley was completely altered, transforming the dull blue of the atmosphere into a burning, brilliant bronze that lasted for 3 full hours as the colony swarmed in a majestic, swirling vortex. It was a visual phenomenon of such immense scale that it was captured by low-orbit environmental satellites, appearing as a distinct golden thumbprint on the surface of the planet. The broken, silent desert had been completely reborn into a loud, thrumming, hyper-saturated ecosystem, healed by the very lineage of the 500 creatures that have been brought there in the dark. We often speak of the earth as a collection of resources to be managed or a fragile victim to be pitied, forgetting that the landscape possesses a profound, ancient memory completely independent of human history. The extraordinary transformation of the valley reminds us that the line between desolation and abundance is often as thin as a butterfly's wing, and that the greatest legacy we can leave for the generations that follow is not what we build, but what we allow to heal. What are your thoughts on the remarkable resilience of this extinct meadow? If you found this historical narrative compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel to support further documentation of our planet's hidden wonders. My name is Christopher Vance, and thank you for listening.